Hi,
Okay.
everyone. Thanks for coming to the Awake and Thriving podcast. Today we have with us Erika Marcoux. She has a master's in psychology and counseling with a private practice for over 20 years. Welcome, Erika.
Thank you.
Yes,
Thanks for having me on the show.
I know. I'm so excited to have you on. We spoke last week for a little bit, a
Mhm.
long bit. We actually spoke for quite a while, like an hour,
Yeah, we couldn't
and we
help
went over a
ourselves.
ton of stuff. And I wanted to start off like kind of at the very beginning with you. Like, how did you get interested in mental health and then go into counseling, psychology, and we'll kind of go off from there?
Well, it was a journey, and really it started at September 11 when that happened.
Mm,
I
mhm,
happened to be living in DC,
mhm,
and I was working at the Red Cross headquarters.
mm,
And when 9/11 happened, I was catty corner from the White House, and we thought that was the next target. So you can imagine that during that time, I had a lot of anxiety. I
yeah,
had a really hard time sleeping at night. And a good friend of mine just said, "Hey, I know someone. She had a PhD in anthropology, but had also studied in energy work.
mm,
And I'm pretty open minded. I didn't know what that meant, but I had sessions with her that were pretty regular, and it was life changing.
mm,
It was just it was my intro into mental health.
mm,
I would even call it, it's just being able to talk to someone about pretty deep stuff and what was going on with me at that time, and even going back in time and developmental stuff that was really quite interesting. And I decided to go ahead and get trained in a modality called polarity therapy. And I know that most people have never heard this, and that's okay. It was developed by a naturopath named Dr. Randolph Stone, and he traveled extensively and had an understanding of Ayurvedic medicine from India and Chinese medicine. So, looking at the meridians and acupuncture and things like that, and developed a hands on approach to helping his patients. And you'd be surprised where the story's going to go, which I think is just funny to tell it. Um, so at that time, I was getting my training. I go to my dentist, and he says, "What are you up to?" And I tell him, and I said, "Yeah, I'm going to start a private practice." And he said, "Really? Well, I have an office that's open down the hall." And so I had an immediate private practice seeing residents of the Watergate Hotel.
oh,
And
wow.
it was pretty cool. And I really noticed that people were having significant improvements to their health, mental health, all sorts of things. And so I'm pretty nerdy. I started looking up different programs that maybe existed, and found that there was a specific graduate program in counseling psychology that focuses on the body. So it's somatic counseling psychology. Soma meaning the body. And there were three programs in the United States. That's it. So one was in Boulder, and then two were in the San Francisco Bay Area. So I did get accepted at one in the Bay Area. So my husband and I moved there. And from there, I really learned a holistic approach to counseling. They draw on traditional Western methods, but also bring in a lot of Buddhist concepts and Eastern philosophies and mindfulness and those kinds of things. So my husband and I decided to move back to Austin. That's where I'm from. And I started my private practice, and then also decided to get training as a yoga instructor. So essentially, what I did was I incorporated all of that into my therapy practice. And
Mm,
what's come of that is something that I think is fairly unique. It's I am fairly different in my approach than traditional therapists, or at least that's what I think. I haven't met anybody that's really like me. in my
No,
approach.
definitely. I've
Yeah.
spoken to some psychologists and
Hmm.
as friends, and they don't have what you're talking about, like your
Yeah.
background or experience. I've honestly, this is
Most
the first time
don't.
I've heard about it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So when you deal with the body and the mind, like how
Hmm.
does, can you give us an example? Like how does that, I'm trying to imagine it in my head and
Yeah.
it's hard for me to even figure out what does that look like? Like what do you do the first couple sessions that would be different than like a normal Western psychologist?
Well, I have to kind of go back to I co wrote a workbook that all of my clients use.
Mm,
And I do break that down because it is very difficult for us to understand. Um, but from what I've noticed in myself and my clients, there does seem to be like four different aspects to being human.
mm,
We've got our body,
mhm,
we've got our emotions and our behavior, and
mhm.
then also our thoughts.
Okay.
And it's the thinking that gets us in trouble.
Yeah. Yeah.
And here's the difference in my approach where I really do separate out that the brain is an organ
Mm,
and understanding that it's there for primarily for survival.
mm,
And what I see as the mind is really our thoughts. And then the other part of that is consciousness. And I tie that in with the concept of a soul.
mm,
And I believe that being able to label it in such a way and understand yourself in that way can bring a lot of clarity and peace.
okay.
So
So you have it depends on who I'm talking to, but like a spiritual side to your practice, right? The
I
consciousness or
believe,
soul.
yeah, I believe that if we divorce ourselves from having a soul, those are some of the most miserable clients that I've worked with,
Yeah.
and there just doesn't seem to be a way for them to get any kind of sustained peace.
Yeah.
And so I have worked with people of all different religions and cultural backgrounds. And so I don't approach it as a hard, fast rule that, you know, but I do believe taking out the soul component, people are left pretty lost.
Mm, okay. And I can see that because even if you, doesn't matter really what religion you are, but having that kind of belief in
Mm-hmm.
that, it gives you something. Like for me, I'm not really any religion. I don't identify with
Mm.
one, but I do know that there's something else out there. Like I know there is. And that gives me some kind of motivation or like want to do better, to give more
Mm-hmm.
intentionally. And I think that's what religion gives to everybody. Uh, and whether they call it God or Buddha or
Mm-hmm.
Muhammad or anything like that, it gives them something more. So I can understand spirituality working well in counseling, like
Mm-hmm.
definitely.
Well, and from my interpretation of Buddhism, it's really more of a philosophy. It's not a religion.
Mm,
And what Buddha was teaching is that we have the soul, the God self within. So it's really not looking outside of ourselves. It's reconnecting to um, that natural consciousness. It's just self awareness and compassion. And I like to use the example of like a child, like even a baby. That baby was born, in my opinion, with a soul.
mm,
And I believe that as adults, we overcomplicate that basic understanding. And so it's connecting with that. And I always like, point to my heart in that because it's not a mental process.
mm.
It's a
Yeah,
knowing. It's an inner knowing.
yeah, definitely. And I feel like most of the great teachers of the past in religions were teachers. They were
Mm-hmm.
teaching, they were teachers. They weren't Buddhists, they weren't Christians, they weren't those religions yet. They had these teachings that they wanted to give to people and
Mm-hmm.
show them a different way. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I think that like that's the truth for me.
Mm-hmm.
So
I
okay.
feel like that's my biggest focus for people is to give themselves give them back to themselves, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, it
I think
does.
we just get lost or confused, and I'm like, no, 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 it's just right here.
Yeah. We look on the outside, like we're looking at the outside for other stuff versus
Right.
right here.
It's all right here
Yeah.
inside.
But it can be that could be the hardest place to look for a lot of people
Right.
is look back at themselves
Right.
internally. They're like, wow, this is my outside world is a reflection of my inside world. Like, what am I doing?
Mm-hmm.
So,
Well, and there's a lot of fear um, looking internally because I think a lot of people are scared of what they might find,
mhm,
that maybe deep down they're not going to like themselves after all or something like that. But what I work with people on is really what are those self-limiting beliefs?
yeah,
I'm not enough, I'm not lovable, I'm not worthy. And again, those are just thoughts.
yeah, yeah, they are.
It's not
And
the ultimate reality. It's an opinion.
yeah. And unfortunately, a lot of those are put in when you're young. Like you
Yeah,
learn those when you're really, really young. And to overcome those and to actually recognize you even have them as an
that's it.
adult
Yes.
is a huge thing, let alone overcoming those beliefs. It's a process. It doesn't, I
Mm-hmm.
mean, for me, it didn't happen overnight for me. I was just really stubborn. And
Mm-hmm.
I was like, this is like, I see it and I'm going to change it. But it took, honestly, for me, it took me years to overcome some of the beliefs that I had and that were put in me from my family. And
Yep.
some of them, I think I have like one hanging over that I know I have, but I recognize it and I'm like actively trying to overcome that.
Mm-hmm.
So
Well, they say that these self-limiting beliefs are set by the time you're 6 years old.
yeah, yeah,
And but here's the good news. Um, they're not going to change.
yeah,
So I mean, once you're able to start looking for them and be objective about it,
yeah,
um, it's kind of like once you know your number, once you've seen it clearly,
yeah,
really it's just um, adopting almost the opposite belief. So if I'm not lovable and that's what I decided about myself at 5 years old,
yeah,
the opposite is really the truth. I am lovable. And it does take time for really the brain to say, oh yeah, that's the new thought pattern.
yeah, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's where affirmations are helpful
They are.
for that to kind of change that belief because it does, like you said, it takes time to do that. It For most people it doesn't happen overnight. It takes a little, it takes a while. For me, certain things it took a few years.
Oh yeah. I mean, I keep learning and changing, and I've been on my own healing journey for a long time,
Yeah,
and there's still new things that I discover,
yeah, yeah,
um,
definitely.
which hopefully is the journey, right?
Yeah,
Hopefully that is the life journey where we are continuously discovering ourselves.
yeah,
And what I call that, and this is a little bit different from how I think most traditional therapists work, also, is that I do believe in a true self and an authentic self.
mm,
And to me, that is the soul,
mm,
and that we have a personality
yeah,
or an ego. And this is where Westerners get real like, whoa, what do you mean? And I don't mean egocentric. So I'm not talking about, someone who can't accept somebody else's perspective.
mm,
That's not it. An ego is our personality. So it's the habits of our physical body. We
mm,
have habitual emotions, habitual behaviors, and habitual thoughts.
mm,
And we need that because that's our very human part. Um, but it's seeing that objectively, and that's where mindfulness comes in. That really all of that can change,
yeah,
but the soul is really unchanging.
yeah,
It's
definitely.
constant and reliable.
So how about let's look at what are some of the common issues most of your clients share over the years?
It's interesting because I have a client information form that all my clients fill out, and I took the time, and it was lengthy, to look over what everyone's presenting issue was,
Mhm.
because I wanted to get a deeper understanding of, is there something that's common there, and there is.
Mm.
And it's this feeling of being lost, of
Mm.
not having direction, of losing their sense of self, whether that's through a job or through a relationship, and not feeling that they're living up to their potential. I mean, and they define that, right? I mean, it's up to them, whatever that means for them. Um, and that was one of the things that I thought about even in grad school was, how is my approach going to be able to help the majority of people? And what is the common problem that needs a solution? And again, I just go back to this concept of coming back to a sense of their deep self, one that they can remember from childhood, one that they can remember from adolescence. It's getting back to the basics of who they really are before all the conditioning.
Mm.
And that can take work. Sometimes people end relationships because it just doesn't fit anymore. It doesn't feed their soul, it doesn't feed their authentic self and what they really want to experience in their life. And that's where I have drawn heavily on more yogic psychology. I didn't even know that there was such a thing, but it's coming back to this principle of perspective. Instead of getting so caught up in the external world or what people think about you, or none of that really matters. It's really about your perspective of yourself
Mhm.
and how you define success for you, and how to really live from an empowered place that is very different from what our culture teaches.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah,
Because our culture is like what their opinions, like other people's opinions, are supposed to be the biggest thing in your life.
that's
And
very sad.
yeah, it's the truth.
Because
It's sad.
that, your sense of self could change every second then,
Yeah,
depending on if somebody likes your post or not.
yeah.
And you
And
know
I
and
I remember looking at something, I read something, it said everybody that you know has a different perspective of you. So you
probably.
have all these different people that like everyone views you differently, and they all have their own perspectives, their own backgrounds. So they're all going to look at you differently. The same, you're not going to be the same person to everybody.
Right, right.
And that could be hard for people to deal with.
Well, and that's why we really need to step back, and it's really about, do you know yourself? And what are your own, how do you regard yourself, and knowing that you can define that, because no other person is going to know you as much as you do. And that goes for counseling also. If you seek guidance from someone, that counselor will never know you as well as you know yourself.
Yeah.
And there is no external expert on you. There never will be. And that's something that we're not teaching younger generations, that it takes work.
Yeah.
It takes work to look inside, and it takes work to define the value system that you have and how you're going to play that out in your life.
Yeah. That explains why a lot of people, well, I'm going to say early 20s, but I feel like
Mm.
people in their 30s and 40s are still trying to figure this out. Like they feel lost, and
Yeah.
they're like, we have everything, but I still don't feel quite like I'm there, because they don't know where they're going yet. How do you help somebody in that situation? Like whether 20, 30, 40, like is there like something brief you could say, like that you would help them?
Well, I people don't usually come in saying that specifically. So I'll give an example that comes up a lot that, hey, there may be a client that's struggling in a relationship.
Mm.
And what I often see is that they're so focused on that other person and what that person may be thinking about them that they're completely negating themselves. And I also turn it on them. I'm like, if you're so focused on that other person, what are you actually contributing to the relationship? And I used to do couples work, but I won't anymore because really the true healing is developing that relationship with yourself. You have to have a loving relationship with ourselves first, a compassionate relationship with ourselves before we can extend that to a loved one. And this notion of romantic love versus true love, they're very different. One is very dramatic. I always call it the telenovela, the
You're right. Yes. Yeah.
which doesn't exist in real life. That would be a roller coaster. And I think people are oftentimes a little annoyed with me. Oh, I want to fix the relationship. I said, you have to come into yourself in a deeper way if you want to experience that with someone else.
Yeah.
But that could
Definitely.
be anybody. It could be a partner. It could be your child.
Yeah.
It could be a coworker. But all relationship starts within.
Mm. I believe that 1,000% because I know before just dating in general, I was I don't think I was quite ready for it, and I didn't from childhood stuff. I don't know if I just didn't know what to look for. Or I didn't think I deserved it from
Yeah,
what I
that's
was
common.
given from my family. I didn't feel like I deserved it. And so it took me dealing with that and doing affirmations and working on myself for a few years and dating the wrong people and realizing my mistakes to
Mm,
get me to a point where I have I have an amazing boyfriend, but the healthiest relationship I've probably ever been in.
mhm.
And anyways, I won't go on more about him, but
Well, I mean,
very
it's a
good
blessing,
communication.
right?
Yeah.
So, and it's worth doing the work.
Yeah.
And it's worth making the mistakes because that's how we learn.
Yes.
Like, oh, that relationship is wrong for me for these reasons.
Yeah.
And then you can reevaluate and change. Okay, well, now what am I really looking for?
Yes.
And you
Yeah.
get it more and more and more refined. And I think it has the most to do about values.
Mm,
What do
yeah.
you value? What does that other person value? And can you come together with that?
Yeah. And we figured because he went through really bad mistakes as well. And he actually had to
Mm-hmm.
go to therapy for about a year and a half because he kept on dating. Well, from what the counselor or psychologist told him, was narcissists. So he was getting in a really bad cycle and he
Mm-hmm.
knew he was doing something wrong. And he's like, I'm picking these women and I don't know what I'm doing wrong, but I know I need help.
Mm-hmm.
So he went and for a year and a half, he went through therapy in order to kind of alleviate that. But I had to go through those mistakes in order to get to this place with you. He's like,
Absolutely.
and I had to go through some mistakes as well in order to
Mm-hmm.
realize what did I really want in a partner
Mm-hmm.
and in a life partner.
Mm-hmm.
So,
It's an
yeah,
important step.
yeah, it was a huge step.
Yeah.
So, all right, let's see. Oh, I love this question. I can't wait to hear what you have to say about this question because I talked to you last week about it, but we didn't really go into depths into this. So, what are the stages of life and why is knowing them important?
Well, first of all, there are stages of life.
Yeah.
And I really got to explore that in an interview I did with a lady named Renee Rogers. She got her PhD in human development. And I've just am still fascinated by what she shared. She just described that there are five major stages to development. And this was observed by a psychologist named Robert Keegan. And Oftentimes I hear people say they wish they had a book to tell them what to do in life, like some sort of guidance. And I'm like, it's here. So he's outlining these stages that he's observed. And as most of us know, there's childhood. And then we move on into adolescence. And adolescence is a time where it's defined by um, being egocentric, which is what we talked about earlier. Everything revolves around that adolescent, that teenager, and nothing really exists outside of it. Relationships are really just to meet their own needs, and it's necessary, right? It's a necessary stage that we all need to experience. In this study, it really shows how difficult it is to move from adolescence into the first stage of adulthood. So, what happens is we go from being egocentric to then all of a sudden realizing, oh man, I need to be a part of society. I need to see the bigger picture. And that's often very clumsy and difficult. And that's typically when people, they may just be graduating from college and entering in the workforce and working for a company for the first time and having to understand their position within that company or within society at large. And that can be daunting. What I found interesting about what Renee Rogers shared is that most adults don't make it out of adolescence.
I can
So
see
they're
that, honestly.
still, yeah.
Because what you described, adolescence, I was like, I feel I
Hmm.
know people today that have that perspective right now. And they're in their 40s.
Yes.
So,
Yes. And so it's tough, you know. And here's the other thing: there's not just one stage of adulthood. So there are actually, let's see, three stages of adulthood, and then one stage even after that.
what
Yeah.
is, oh,
Now,
let's
if we
go to
think
those a
about
little bit.
it, I know. If we think about this logically, though, you may say that, okay, an adult is a 27-year-old. Think about what they're focused on in their life. And now think of an adult who's 72 and what they're focused on in their life. They are not in the same stage. And again, you might have a 72-year-old that's still in the stage of adolescence, but typically not. I mean, typically they're advancing. So the way that Robert Keegan has has shared this is that basically, the first stage of adulthood is where we're socialized, and the next stage of adulthood is self-authoring. So it's where an adult comes to a place in their life where they say, I'm not going to allow society to dictate to me anymore. I'm going to discover my own internal values. And from there, I'm going to create my own story. I'm going to be my own authority instead of looking for authority outside of me. And so that's a very creative stage in life.
Yeah. I think I
And
remember that stage. Like what you described, I remember
mhm,
that occurring in my life. And it was when I was about 29, 30, and that changed for me. I was like, I need to not pay attention to what my family wants for
mhm,
me and actually figure out what do I want for myself.
that's right.
Yeah. That was a big shift for me, but I remember that. That was a poignant time in my life.
And some people don't ever realize or give themselves permission to do that.
Mm, okay.
Mhm. And so the next stage of adulthood is the self transforming self. And so that's typically, and most people never make it to that stage, by the way. But those are the kind of leaders that you may see in our community that have gone through the self-authoring stage, where that's more focused on the self and in the individual, but they want to take what they've learned and bring it out into the community.
Mm,
So
okay.
those are the kind of, I would say, helpful leaders that we've had.
Okay. Wow, I have to read that book. You're gonna send me some links because that's
Well, actually, I don't know that I don't have any book that I've read on that, but you
really
can listen to the interview. There's 2 episodes of my podcast in season 1 with
okay.
Renee Rogers, and she explains it really well.
Yeah, definitely. That sounds
Mhm.
amazing.
And hopefully, I did it justice in my explanation.
Well, if anything, you piqued our interest
Yes,
because
there
I'm
you
like,
go.
I need to know more about that.
Yeah, yeah.
So after transformation and having
Mhm.
helpful leaders, there's another stage.
There is, and that's called the unitive stage. And from what I understand about that, that's someone more than, let's say they're in meditation all the time, or that it's just this kind of complete absorption in being.
Oh,
Not many people make it there.
yeah. What is that called again?
It's called unitive, the
Un-
unitive stage.
oh, unitive stage. Interesting. I'm not unitive. I'm not even sure I've ever heard that word before, Eric.
Hmm. Hmm.
Okay. All right. All right. We've covered a lot. A
We
lot, a lot.
have, we have.
So let me just ask you like a question or two, just a fun question. Okay.
Okay.
So, what is your favorite breakfast in the morning?
I eat the same thing every morning and it's really boring. It's a macro bar.
You eat a macro bar in the morning? What flavor?
It's peanut butter. It's the same flavor. Yeah, I don't deviate very much. That and coffee. Gotta have the coffee.
Yes, me too.
Hmm.
Peanut butter. All right, perfect. And then, are there any books right now that you're reading that you find
I
interesting?
am. I There's a book called Buddha's Brain. And what I really like about it is it's describing a lot of the neuroscience that's happening right now. And we are learning so much. It's such a fast pace about how the brain and the nervous system actually work. And it's just exciting.
Okay,
Yeah,
that sounds interesting.
it is.
All right, I will look into that book, and the reason combining like the meditative side along with connecting it with neuroscience,
Hmm.
fascinating to me that we're
It
actually able
is.
to look at the benefits that that stuff provides finally
Right.
now.
Yeah, because
So,
meditation has been around and I mean, and documented as long as we can remember. I mean, well over 2,000 years.
yeah,
And we have the equipment. We're able to see the MRI scans. We're able to understand the brain so much better.
yeah,
And, I have to remember to remind my clients that our brains are about survival. It doesn't necessarily, it's not wired or has evolved to just be complacent or happy or calm. So, we're kind of going uphill with that. So it does take training
yeah,
to be able to have more control over the brain, the nervous system. And
yeah.
that's what mindfulness and meditation can provide.
Yeah, and I love how far we've came just in the last 10 years when it comes to meditation because I remember when I started meditating, which was honestly this year it'll be 10 years ago I
Uh-huh.
started. And I remember when I first started and I would tell people about it, it was still not a readily accepted thing. People still thought it
Right.
was woo woo and a little
Right.
out there. But now it's really mainstream. We have apps now for it. There's
Mm-hmm.
different ways that are acceptable to actually do
Mm-hmm.
that. And I think we're finally realizing that mental health matters. Meditation is helpful for that too. So,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Yes.
All right. Well, it's been lovely having you on.
Thank you.